A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
I was speaking to somebody on Rosh HaShanah who criticized those who went to the sunrise minyan, which is shorter, since he stated that on Rosh HaShanah one's davening should be long. Is there a halachic source which indicates that davening on Rosh HaShanah, or for that matter Yom Kippurim, should be long?
Well, let's begin at the beginning. We have a halakha which speaks about the isur of rehisa, the prohibition against washing or bathing on Yom Kippurim. And Hazal make it clear that there are exceptions to this rule. For example, a person who is sick. Another example is a kala. A kala is a newly wed bride. And Hazal state that for the first 30 days after her marriage, she is allowed to wash her face on Yom Kippurim. And the reason given by the Talmud is Shilo titganeh al ba'ala, so that she should not not appear unseemly or not look pretty or attractive in the eyes of her husband, her new husband. This halakha is quoted by the Hayei Adam, the famous posek, the Hayei Adam, and he says that it seems to me that this halakha referred to ancient times when people did not spend all day in the Beth Knesset. In other words, they went to the Beth Knesset, they went to shul, they davened, etc. We're talking about Yom Kippurim, keep in mind. But eventually they also went home and they spent time at home, resting, whatever, sitting around, speaking to each other. And in that situation, Hazal were concerned that the young bridegroom would not be happy with the way his wife looked, with his new wife within 30 days, if she were not to wash her face, etc. But, says the Hayei Adam, nowadays, when the norm is that a man goes to shul in the morning and doesn't see his wife till the evening, and if he does see her, then it's only for a few fleeting moments, then it really makes no difference. And therefore this halakha should not apply nowadays. And he also adds that I have not heard or seen any rabbis or Jews act upon this halakha and allow a newlywed bride to wash her face on Yom Kippurim. What do we learn? What can we learn from this halakha? Actually, what we have here is an admission, a very clear, unmistakable admission that things have changed. Before I continue, I wish to state for the record that not always is change a bad thing, not at all. It all depends. What kind of change, for what reason, what is the motivation, what are the circumstances, etc. But regarding tefillah on Yom Kippur, and this also applies to Rosh HaShanah, it is clear that there has been a very great change over the centuries and over the millennia. In other words, it is clear that the intention of the Hachamim, of Hazal, when they instituted the tefilloth, which we say on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippurim, their intention was clearly not that the tefillah take 5, 6, 7 or more hours. For example, there are many places, of course I'm referring to Ashkenazi minyanim, as I will explain in a moment. There are many places where the Rosh HaShanah davening from start to finish, which also usually includes a break at some point before Tkiyat Shofar, because people have been davening already for some time, a few hours, and it's getting late and people are hungry. There's also the question of fasting beyond midday on a Yom Tov, which is Asur. So there's usually a break, people make kiddush, they eat something, they come back to shul. This of course adds time to the whole endeavor. So the whole business from start to finish, from Shaharith to the end of Musaf, depending on the shul, there are some that perhaps it even takes as little as 4 hours in some Ashkenazi shuls, but more common would be something closer to 6 hours, and some places it's 7 and more hours. This is clearly not what the Chachamim had in mind, not for Rosh HaShanah and not for Yom Kippurim, and this is exactly what the Hayadam was referring to. He was fully aware of this fact, that the Ashkenazi minhag, he himself of course was an Ashkenazi, and he was familiar probably only with the Ashkenazi minhagim and practice on these days, living in Lithuania as he did. He is referring to the Ashkenazi practice of tefillah on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippurim, which involves many additions, piyutim, and other additions to the tefillah, which create a very long and drawn-out tefillah, which also means, practically speaking, that on a day like Yom Kippur, when there's no meal to be eaten and there's no reason, so to speak, to be at home or not to be in shul, no overriding halachic imperative not to be there, such as there is on Rosh HaShanah, when one has to actually go home and have a meal and rejoice. It's being a Yom Tov, as we will mention in a moment. When these considerations do not exist on Yom Kippurim, the result of the Ashkenazi practice is that essentially the entire day is spent in the Beit Knesset, which in and of itself is not at all necessarily a bad thing if people are up to it, if people are capable of focusing and praying or learning, etc., all day. That's very good. It's probably not true, to be fair, to be realistic, that's probably not true for most people. But if that's what a person is capable and interested in doing, that's wonderful. But the reality of the Ashkenazi practice led the Hayadam to point out that things have changed radically over time.
How precisely did the davening on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippurim become so lengthy?
Well, that's a very good question. I do not know if I can give you a precise answer. I'm not sure, in fact, that anybody can. But this much is clear. First of all, it's obvious that this did not happen 2,000 years ago or even 1,000 years ago, because many of the piyutim recited by the Ashkenazim on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippurim were not even authored at that time. There were piyutim. The custom of adding piyutim to the tefillah, to the Chazrat HaShatz or other parts of the tefillah, was in fact an ancient practice. That is true, a practice which originated in Eretz Yisrael. That's also true. But it's equally true that the normal practice was to add 1 or 2 piyutim according to the choice, the preference of the shliach tzibur, or the hazan, the person leading the tefillah in the shul, or perhaps the preference or the custom of that particular town or locality, according to the preference of the people who come to the shul, but not necessarily to recite every single piyut that was ever written by any chacham, by anyone at all, so that one should feel, as it were, obligated to recite all piyutim that had ever been put on paper. This was not the case, and was almost certainly not the case, and could not have been the case before the advent of the printing press. I believe that what happened is roughly as follows. When people began to print sidurim, mahzorim, etc., they, of course, different people were involved in this these kinds of endeavors, which was a business venture. It cost a tremendous amount of money in those days, more than it does today, and today it's also very expensive to print books. Then it was extremely expensive, and you wanted to guarantee that you would recoup your investment and make a profit. And you also wanted to give a person a reason to buy your mahzor as opposed to the mahzor mentioned or written, printed by someone else. What the printers began to do, therefore, was to claim that their mahzor or their sidur included more material than the competition's mahzor. So all piyutim, all texts that were somehow related to Yom Kippur or Yom Kippurim were included in the mahzor. This is also true for sidurim, but to a lesser extent. In other words, to weekday or sidurim used during the year. The more a person could claim that his book contained, the more he was likely to outsell his competition and make a profit. And thus, I believe, the format of tefillah, which we see today amongst the Ashkenazim, began to take shape. In other words, you began to have mahzurim, which included within them a tremendous number of piyutim. Of course, it was no one's intention, and it probably was not the case in any part of the Ashkenazi world till that time, that you must say all of these piyutim. The idea was to give you the choice to choose one or two piyutim to be added, usually according to the Ashkenazi practice, to the Hazarat Hashatz, the repetition of the Amidah by the Chazan, so that he could choose one or two and make the tefillah more interesting. And some of these piyutim, these liturgical poems, are very beautiful and very profound, without a doubt, and therefore make the tefillah into a more enriching and an interesting experience. But it was not the intention that one has to recite all the piyutim that appear in the mahzor. However, I think over time this nevertheless became the practice, that a format of tefillah was developed, tunes were developed, etc. A whole system was created, as it were, in the Ashkenazi world, and dafka in the Ashkenazi world, whereby all the material that appears in the mahzor must be included in the service in the Beit Knesset, in the shul.
What the Rav has just been talking about reminds me of a famous comment I once heard the Rav say, which was that Nusach Tefillah can be compared to a bus which picks up passengers but never drops them off.
I think you're referring to the fact that I commented that the historical reality is that Jews tend to add to the Sidur Tefillah, to the Mahzor. They tend to add to what is said in the shul, but very rarely, in fact probably never, to detract, to subtract something from the known set of prayers, not to detract, to remove something from the text, but adding it seems to have been a simple matter. In this case, I'm saying that it wasn't just a question of adding or subtracting, it was a question of offering a choice, providing the person with all the information, all the different piyutim, so that the shul, the chazan, the rabbi could choose what they would say, but somehow this message was not fully understood. Something got lost in the translation, as it were, and the practice became that we are going to say everything that appears in this mahzor, and this is what we have today. It must be stressed that this is a purely or almost entirely an Ashkenazi phenomenon, because in the Sephardi world and in the Temani world, tefillah and Rosh HaShanah Yom Kippur is a very different experience. It takes much less time, and the number of piyutim, even if there are a few piyutim, the number of piyutim is far fewer piyutim are recited, and the number of additions are far fewer, and the overall elapsed time of the minyan is without a doubt considerably shorter, to the point that I can tell you from my own personal experience And if you like, I'll tell you more about this and how I discovered this, and how I discovered the differences between the different Eidot, between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim and the Temanim, regarding these matters. The difference can be as much as 3 or 4 hours between a Sephardi or a Temani Rosh HaShanah davening, for example, and that of an Ashkenazi davening.
If the Rav could, would you please elaborate upon how you became aware of these issues, as far as length of tefillah, and what happened in your personal life that led you to your conclusions?
Well, if I can speak of my own experiences and my own personal journey, you could say, regarding these matters, I can tell you as follows. If you ask me, what do I recall about the davening on Rosh HaShanah or Yom Kippurim when I was a child or when I was a teenager in Chutz La'aretz, I would tell you frankly I don't remember all that much. I remember that it was long. Beyond that, I don't know if I thought about it very much. I certainly didn't know that there was any other kind of davening. Later, when I came to Israel, just before I turned 17, at first I was in, my first Rosh HaShanah in the country was in Yeshivat HaKotel, in the Iratika in Yerushalayim. After that I was in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav for many years. My experience of Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippurim davening was, of course, the davening that these yeshivot, like the vast majority of yeshivot, both black and white, for want of a better term, the davening in most yeshivot is of Ashkenazi, based on the Ashkenazi format, except, of course, for some specific yeshivot which are clearly and deliberately Sephardi. As for Temani, I don't know if there is such yeshiva, or maybe there's one in the entire country. At any rate, the vast majority of yeshivot, and certainly the ones where I attended, the tefillah was entirely based on the Ashkenazi format, which meant, for example, I recall in those days in Merkaz Harav, the tefillah on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur began at 6:30 in the morning, and Musaf on Rosh HaShanah was over sometime between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. Nowadays, by the way, the tefillah has been put off by 1 hour. Tefillah begins in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav on Rosh HaShanah Yom Kippur at 7:30, and therefore the tefillah ends around 2:30. That gives you a total time of approximately 7 hours. That 7 hours includes a break of 30 or 40 minutes to allow people to dash home, make kiddush, eat something quickly, and come back for Tkiyat Shofar and Musaf. So the tefillah is a very long and drawn-out exercise. And at first I didn't think very much of it, I must admit. But after some time, after a few years, I began to wonder whether this is in fact what Hazal had in mind, whether this is in fact what the halakha requires, whether in fact this is even desirable. Because it's possible to ask whether something is desirable, and the answer might be, or whether something is necessary rather, and the answer might be it's not necessary, but it's very good, it's very proper, it's desirable, it's positive in many ways. It's also possible to reach the conclusion, and this was in fact the conclusion I began to reach, that not only was it not necessary, not based on any halachic requirement, this type of tefillah which went on for so long, but it began to occur to me that this was in fact counterproductive in terms of allowing people to focus on the tefillah. Most people can simply not concentrate for that many hours. If you take the question of Chazat Hashatz, the repetition of the Amidah, shall we say, take for example Rosh HaShanah, an Ashkenazi tefillah is likely to be somewhere between 1.5 to 2 hours. This is a fairly long period of time, much longer than the attention span of most serious, intelligent human beings. And this also means, therefore, by definition, that people are not really able to focus and concentrate on the entire Hazrat Hashatz from start to finish, which is in fact an halachic requirement. It also means, by the way, that for many people they find it impossible to stand for such a long period of time, and therefore they sit during Hazrat Hashatz or part of Hazrat Hashatz, which is also a problem because according to halakha one should stand for all of Hazrat Hashatz. But if you make Hazrat Hashatz, the repetition of the Amidah, so lengthy, then many people will simply not be able to do this, even if you tell them this is required. So after a few years, I began to look for some alternative type of tefillah on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur. At first I tried some vatikin, some sunrise minyanim, also based on the Ashkenazi format, but which were a little bit briefer. Let's say we started at 4:30 in the morning and we finished by 11:15 or 11 o'clock. It's a little bit shorter, but it's still, you will agree, rather lengthy. And then I began to hear some year or years later that Sephardim do not daven according to the same format at all. They have no piyutim during the repetition of the Amidah, and they have very few piyutim altogether before and after the Amidah, but not during, and the entire tefillah is much shorter. So actually for 2 years I went to the minyan of Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, who at that time had just recently become the Rav Rashi. I went to his minyan for 2 years running on Rosh HaShanah, and the tefillah was 4 or just over 4 hours long. From about 4:30, it was a sunrise minyan, 4:30 in the morning until 8:30 or 8:45. And then there for the first time I began to see a tefillah, a minyan, on Rosh HaShanah, which was substantively different from the Ashkenazi model. Very few piyutim, and Hazrat Hashatz was a much shorter affair. People were not required to stand for such lengthy periods of time, etc. And I thought this was a very interesting and refreshing, and it seemed to me also more halachically correct and more reasonable for many Jews if they were only aware or made aware that this possibility exists, that this other model for Rosh HaShanah or Yom Kippur davening exists. And then sometime later I became aware that the Temanim also have such a system, in fact even shorter. I can tell you that the local Temani shul in my neighborhood today takes exactly 3.5 hours on Rosh HaShanah, for example. And there are Temani minyanim where they do it even in 3 hours, without rushing anything at all. Because there are very few extraneous accretions to the tefillah, and the whole system is much closer to what Hazal, and by the way what the Rishonim speak of and had in mind.
Would the Rav estimate that many Jews out there feel as the Rav does regarding the davening being excessively long?
I have no doubt that many Ashkenazi Jews, if they were to become aware of the fact that davening on Rosh HaShanah and or Yom Kippur does not have to be, and was not in fact meant to be, such a drawn-out, lengthy, and essentially a kind of a marathon experience. And I think most honest people will admit that most people, I know there are exceptions, but we should not base the halakha and public practice based on the exceptions, on the minority. We should go by the majority. As we know, in all cases, halakha is based on the usual standard reality and the majority of people. So if most Ashkenazim were to discover that there is another way to daven on Rosh HaShanah, I have no doubt that many of them would opt for such a tefillah. The thing is that even those Jews who during the year or on a regular Shabbat perhaps sometimes cross the line, so to speak, and daven in an Ashkenazi might daven in a Sephardi shul or vice versa. When it comes to Yomim Noraim, basically, almost without exception, people return, and I understand why, of course. It has to do with nostalgia, with what one is used to. It has to do with tunes and customs that one is familiar with. People tend to go back to their sources, to their roots, so to speak. So Ashkenazim daven in Ashkenazi shuls, and Sephardim in Sephardi shuls, and Temanim in Temani shuls. There are very, very few, probably nearly no Temanim at all, who have experienced an Ashkenazi tefillah on Rosh HaShanah, and vice versa. There are probably almost no Ashkenazim who have attended a Temani minyan or Sephardi minyan on Rosh HaShanah, Yom Kippur. And therefore, in the case of Sephardim and Temanim, they just probably don't know, or they hear by report perhaps, but they've never experienced an Ashkenazi tefillah, and they cannot really conceive of what it is the Ashkenazim are doing for so long. And as for the Ashkenazim, most of them, the vast majority, are simply unaware that there could be any other way of doing things. And this is, I do not believe it is correct. I do not think it's fair. It's really a question in some ways of fair and honest disclosure. People should be aware, Jews should be aware of what the halakha requires, what Hazal had in mind, what the Rishonim spoke of and described the tefillah, how it should be, and therefore roughly how long it should take. And they should be able to choose what kind of minyan they wish to attend. But this is, practically speaking, not the case at all. Most people are simply unaware that there is another way of doing things, which is entirely 100% in accordance with halakha and Hazal and the Rishonim, and for that matter with the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch does not require, it doesn't specify how many piyutim one should say. It doesn't specify how long the tefillah should take. This is simply a question of an historic evolutionary process, a development that took place over many centuries, as I described before. Almost certainly began around the time of the advent of the printing press, so we're talking about 500 years, not more than that. And yet this has become the only way to spend one's Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur. With regards to Yom Kippur, one could say, by the way, and there would be some truth to this point, that what else is there to do on Yom Kippur anyhow? Why would you not want to be in shul when you can't eat, you can't drink, you can't do much of anything else? So davening, learning, etc., this would be the best thing to do. Now, this is entirely true on the one hand. If a person is capable of spending all day in shul and wants to do so, and will not simply find an impossible burden or a task which is beyond his or her capabilities, that's all well and good. I very much suspect that this is not true for most people, most Jews, most God-fearing and well-intentioned Jews. I don't think this is within their capabilities. I don't think they would really want things to be this way if it could be any other way. With regards to Rosh HaShanah, it should be pointed out there is actually a real halachic issue here as well, a real halachic problem, and that which does not exist during Yom Kippur, which is the fact that Rosh HaShanah is a Yom Tov, and on Yom Tov there is a chovah, literally to eat, drink and be merry. There is a miswah, even if there is not the miswah of V'samachta b'hagecha, which applies on the Shlosha Regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, there is nevertheless a miswah to feast, to be happy, to rejoice on Rosh HaShanah, which is not a hidush in any way. What I'm saying now, this is explicitly written in the Tanakh, in Sefer Nehemiah, Perek Heth. It describes there the tefillah and the reading of the Torah that took place in the time of Nehemiah and Ezra Sofer, so we're talking about approximately 2,450 odd years ago. And it describes how they read the Torah and how at some point when people heard the Tochaha and other things that were being read to them, people were upset and people were became overwhelmed with remorse and fear perhaps, and they were crying and they were despondent. And Nehemiah and Ezra turned to the Jews in Yerushalayim, next to the Beit Mikdash, 2,500 years ago, and they say to them, Lechu ve'ichlu mashmanim, go home and eat rich and tasty dishes that you have prepared. Ushathu mamtakim, and drink sweet and expensive drinks that you have prepared and bought for the Hag, and send food to those who do not have, because this is a holy day and you should be, and it's a special day to Hashem, and you should be happy. Ki hadwath Adonai hi ma'uzchem, it says that the rejoicing in Hashem and giving expression to this feeling of simcha, of rejoicing and celebration, by way of a festive meal and spending time with your family, etc., in a relaxed Yom Tov atmosphere. This is what you should. This is part of what one should be doing on Rosh HaShanah. The Ashkenazi format is such that it leaves very little room, in many cases at least, it leaves very little room for a proper celebration of the Yom Tov. These are at least some of the thoughts that passed through my mind in recent days during Rosh HaShanah.
That which the Rav states regarding the length of tefillah has other implications regarding those Jews who are not observant. For such Jews, these holy days can truly be yamim noraim, akin to being in a torture chamber. Does the Rav have any comments regarding this?
You make a very good point, because throughout the world, both here in Israel and overseas, the days, very often the only days that some Jews actually come to shul and experience any kind of Jewish prayer, any kind of davening, is Rosh HaShanah and or Yom Kippur. And I'm sure that it's quite obvious to me that for many of these people, even though they come to shul and they wish to identify and wish to be connected in some way, the experience that meets them, the very, very drawn-out, lengthy tefillah, which is often also very difficult to follow, very often because of all the optional accretions and piyutim, etc., that are added to the Ashkenazi tefillah. Very often the tefillah, the experience that they go through, is a very difficult one, very disconcerting and unsatisfying, and probably does not encourage them to make an effort to come to shul more often. In fact, my heart goes out to such Jews, unobservant Jews, who actually make the effort to come to shul on such days and find their shul experience to be so unhappy and dissatisfying and difficult, and thus many of them, I'm sure, are certainly not encouraged and often discouraged from connecting to Judaism more, and this is very tragic because it does not need to be so. It can also be added that this is not only the case with regards to the length of the tefillah and the format of the tefillah, particularly in the Ashkenazi world on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur. This is also true of certain areas of halacha, in fact many areas, where standard halachic practice today, that which is considered to be obligatory today, which is in fact not so, not based on what Hazal say, often based on some rather extreme interpretation or humrah or custom. Some of these aspects of what to many people today are considered standard and necessary and required halachic and Jewish practice are such that Jews who are not familiar with Orthodox Judaism would find it very difficult to accept upon themselves some of these norms and standards, and in fact they have a point. If it was made clear to them this is in fact not what is required, and what the halakha really requires is something more reasonable and something less challenging for many people, this might make a big difference to their attitude towards Judaism and their desire perhaps to connect or reconnect to Judaism.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. And a word to our viewers. If you would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with Rabbi Bar-Hayim in honor or memory of a loved one, or if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.